Just to check, can you hear the music? Okay, I'm going to try that again and see if it works, because it should work. Now? This is always a challenge when we have I'm going to try and see if there is a setting issue, audio. I'm going to try that again. I hope it works this time. We still have time. So thank you so much for being there and helping me with this. Okay, so we still have a little bit time. I'm going to wait for everyone to come, and then we will start sharp at 9:30. It's nice to see you, Ambassador. It's nice to see you, Ludwig. Well, hello, everybody. So thank you for joining us. I would want to honor our time. It's sharp at 9:30, so I'm going to start. I would actually, you couldn't hear, unfortunately, the music that was playing, but is there anything about this picture that you find unusual? And I'd love if you could put it in the chat. Does anyone know? Did you notice anything unusual in this picture? The man in the bottom left, okay. Yeah, Aisha says AI. So there are two deep fakes in this picture. The Pope, this is a deep fake, and that's Donald Trump, actually. That's also a deep fake. But what's more interesting, actually, is this picture won a prize at a fair for art, and it was created by AI. So it raised all these complicated questions like, could you enter a picture created by AI actually and win a prize? So I just wanted to start by saying the topic of artificial intelligence is complicated. And I will try to make it as easy as possible as I go on by sharing many different examples. So let's go and look at some of the things that, before I even start, first of all, I would like to say hello. I know we have people from Europe. I know we have some from US. I know we have some people obviously from here, from the UAE and the Middle East and India. So thank you so much for joining. This is a pleasure. We're as international as we can. So this is thanks to technology. Before I begin, just a little bit about the school that I belong to. So the Mohammed bin Rashid School is not a university, it's an institution set up by His Highness Sheikh Mohammed, who's the ruler of Dubai and the vice president of the United Arab Emirates. And the mandate we had was good governance. So if you visited Dubai or if you visited UAE, you really realize that we're trying to be ahead of the curve. And that gives me the honor of actually working in the space of governance. So that's a lot of the work me and my colleagues do. This is Ramadan. So over this period, we have done a couple of talks. I think I'm the last talk for this season. And I wanted specifically with all the conversations around ChatGPT and things like that to focus on AI governance. So much of the material that I'm doing is taken from a new upcoming book. And I've just put some of the reviews in the book. We've tried to make sure that it not only caters to the technology person, but also to the policymaker, to the academic, and of course, the business person. So it's really, and I work in this space between engineers, academics, and policy people. There is a gap, and which I would like to fill a little bit today And I would say it's only the starting point. There is so much we can discuss, but we will not have the time. So this is some of my other work. I work with IEEE, for example, and I do a lot of work on the metaverse space also. So happy to share this later. If you all send me an email, I'll put my email at the end of the talk. We are going to go through 5 parts. First, I will introduce you to artificial intelligence systems, and I like that word. I prefer systems as opposed to just AI, and I'll explain why. I'll talk very briefly, what do I mean by governance? Most likely, I'm going to speak, when I say most likely, I will focus more on governance from the point of view of government and large corporations. There are large tech companies that are as big as countries, so I think they have the same mandate. They should, ideally. I'm going to talk about the challenges of managing AIS, and this is going to be across, but I'll sum it up in section 3, the opportunities and trade-offs. I don't like using the word only risks, so I'm going to speak about trade-offs, and I will give you, in my opinion, what are some tips for future-proofing AIS. So if we begin, I would like to define AI again. There are a lot of definitions, but this is my definition. It's really a combination of hardware, software, and data. Whichever way you look at it, you need all 3. And I'm going to start, for example, with data. The amount of data we produce today is phenomenal. In fact, they say 90% of the data produced today is produced over the last 2 years. So when we talk about data bias, already there's a bias. We're capturing data only in the last 2 years. How long has human civilization lived, right? So there is a big gap over there. And that becomes an interesting question. Also, when we look at data, it's not just how you capture data, it's about the quality of the data, it's about the reliability and relevance of the data, because what was captured yesterday may not be relevant today. It's about storage of the data. And this is interesting for me. I found out there is more than 100 different file formats to store data, right? So you can think of everything that can go wrong with data management, just the complexity of that. Then let's look at software. If you look at programming and the early types of programming, most of the languages, like if I look at 1997, just before the dot-com boom, was mostly COBOL, right? COBOL was 80% of the languages, and you find it quite often in mainframe. For example, Fortran, which is one of the early languages, also was used to launch man to the moon by NASA. Now, these are there in banking systems, in government systems, in medical systems. And what we've done is we've taken, I read a report, more than 500 different software languages right now. So we keep building other languages on these basic languages. So again, think about the complexities over there. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, for example, he said they had something like 15,000 APIs as an example, microservices. So these are all opportunities for risk, right? They did a survey of software engineers on APIs, and a majority said, 51% said, this was a survey sample size of 37,000, 51% said that they actually spend most of their times developing APIs, right? So they're just connecting code. And these same engineers said they had at least one security incident every month. So you cannot look at AI as just one independent unit. You have to think of all the complexities that are there. And then look at hardware, right? We cannot do AI without hardware. So a lot of it is infrastructure. So we have all these debates about 5G, 6G, and I think the conversations, global conversations on this is going to continue. But why is this important? Because when you transfer data from one point to another one, there's a gap in the time from me sending it to you. And this may be in milliseconds, but this also raises questions of hackability, for example, right? So is the data secure in that little breach over there? And I'll just give you one example, which I thought was so fascinating. In the year 2000, Sony restricted the sale of Sony PlayStations 2. And this was because they found that their PlayStations could be used as missile guidance systems, right? And in fact, the Air Force, the US Air Force in 2010 built a supercomputer using Sony PlayStation 3. almost 2,000 of them, but still. So you can see how hardware plays a critical role. And as we talk about things like metaverse and virtual reality, I think it becomes even more interesting because there's a question of accessibility, right? We always say in our SDGs and human rights, we want an equal world. Hardware is expensive. So I think this becomes an interesting possibility. So again, I don't want to just refer to AI by itself. When I mean AI, I mean artificial intelligence systems, which is a combination of all three. All right, so AI is machines that mimic human intelligence. And if you've been keeping up with current affairs recently, there was this letter to pause some of the work that's happening with generative AI, which is very, very fascinating, right? So the assumption is that AI is close to human intelligence, and I want to actually address that once and for all. So does AI equal human intelligence? So let's look at it this way. I hope this animation works. So if it's not working, please let me know in the chat box. Can you see the first layer that's been revealed? Yes, Mohammed, I agree. Yes, okay, fantastic. Thanks, Rauda. So the first one is, let's go and look at what do I mean by human intelligence? And there's been a lot of studies on this, and humans have multiple types of intelligence, right? We can move, we can talk, we can see. It's not that we do one thing at one time. We do all of these things simultaneously. In fact, even subconsciously, my heart is beating, I'm taking breaths in. I'm not telling myself to do this, it happens there. But AI still cannot do multiple things at one time. It has to be trained and is relatively narrow. So it can do specific tasks for what it's trained. So a chatbot only looks at text, right? An image generator looks at images. So in this case, I think still the human outweighs in terms of intelligence. If I really take the definition of intelligence, the human is more intelligent than AI, right? Let's take something else about learning. Now, generally, AI needs supervisions. Now, we know with machine learning, we can train them to find connections, but the reality is, even with ChatGPT, you had human trainers at the back of it, if you read this thing. So this is interesting because a human being has the capacity for self-learning, and this can be throughout their life. So it's important to acknowledge that. So I think in this also, definitely human is much better than AI. Let's take the capacity to create new knowledge, right? And I think this is very, very important. And I read a very interesting study on the stock of human quality of language. And it says the good quality data of human language will be exhausted by 2026, all right? That we're running out of language data to train AI. So this raises interesting questions. If AI is trained on human knowledge, if humans stop creating knowledge, then will AI create new knowledge? And that becomes interesting. So we know we have 5,000 years of history. Human beings have the ability to create new knowledge. I think AI is too young for us to reach there. So at this point, again, I would say human wins over AI. Let's look at energy consumption, because I think this is important, especially since a huge amount of conversations are about sustainability. The UAE is actually hosting COP28 later this year. So the human brain, right, and we often look at computers like brains, runs on 23 watts of energy. That's a very minuscule amount. But if you look at an average computer, it's 600 kilowatts per 8 hours a day. If you look at transformer systems like ChatGPT, 1.1 to 23 million. Human being wins again, far more efficient in operating than a computer is. So I don't think computers yet are as intelligent. And then we look at the human brain, and it's interesting. We still don't know how the human brain exactly works. So while we do know neurons are there, we're still at the tipping point of learning about the human brain. But even then, when we look at the collections, and maybe quantum computing will change that, we're still at 540 billion parameters. But if we don't understand the full functioning of the brain, I think we need to stop referring to computers like a brain. This creates a lot of hype unnecessarily and chaos. And the last thing, and I think this is fascinating, right? Our DNA can store all the knowledge in the world accumulated by 22 25 in 4 Evian bottles of 500 ml, so 2 liters, right? But if you want to store all the data in the world, you would need so many data servers, and this would increase the world's greenhouse consumption production by 3.2%, right? It will contribute to 3.2%. Currently, right now, they say data servers is equivalent to the country of Argentina. So if you just look at this, who do you think wins, human or AI? Right? I think it is the human being. So my issue right now is if the human being is far smarter than AI systems, then AI systems can help human beings, but should not replace human beings. And we generally find AI systems more and more are replacing human beings in key jobs. And this is the bigger worry I feel in the governance system. So you see all of these new headlines coming in, some of it, yes, like hype, but I think there is a worry because we're not understanding the difference between an AI and a human being. By the way, if you're looking at the picture at the bottom corner and it says English anchor, that is an AI generated news reporter from China, right? So we also see more and more introductions of deep fakes, which becomes interesting because our entire legal system is based on what I see, what I hear, and currently what I see and what I hear is no longer necessarily real. It can be faked. So we need to rethink a lot of the systems put into place. We haven't done that yet. So this brings me to this wonderful point of governance, right? What do I mean by governance? So let's just take a look at the landscape around the world today. So more and more regulations, I don't think this is going to stop. It's going to continue to increase. For example, if you see at the topmost corner, it talks about there are more than for example, 77 regulations in United States, in European Union 59, Canada 14, United Kingdom 57, right? And some of these are in the parliaments or still under discussion. One thing we generally agree is, is governments take longer to come up with regulations. Just for example, if you look at the AI Act, I think now it's been 2 years. And one of the big things with the AI Act was how do you classify risks? And they based it on the OECD classification. And maybe that's not relevant again right now because ChatGPT, which they initially thought all chatbots were low risk, makes them rethink it's high risk. So we see that regulations sometimes lag behind what's actually happening in real life. So we have 800 AI policy initiatives from 69 countries, territories, and EU. I think it's complex, especially if you're a business to navigate this, because not necessarily everyone is aligned or agrees on what needs to be done. And the law is fuzzy in many places, so it's hard. So this was just the example of the EU classification. And right now, clearly, we have to rethink some of these classifications. Now, it's interesting, the EU does talk about AI systems, right? And that's important, but when you read in greater detail how they talk about it, they still talk about some of the conventional things like, transparency, bias, but in those cases, they don't acknowledge the systemic part of AI. And here are some examples from just as places like with ChatGPT and why it's now a high-risk system. So somebody is planning to sue ChatGPT because it started creating it made a comment or it wrote a report saying somebody was involved in a bribery scandal. Now, this also means we have to change our education system, because if people start believing this, start tweeting it, start putting it on Instagram, we have challenges, right? So this is the whole systemic thing. And I want to make a mention of something. I know, for example, today there was a shooting in US, and this is, my heart goes out. There's too many shootings in US. But I want to refer to a specific shooting that happened in New York, in Buffalo, in 2022. Now, the shooter who went into a school and I think it was a school, I'm not sure on that, recorded this on Twitch And at the time he recorded it, there were 20 to 28 viewers. By the time he shot people and killed them, this was all live streamed. This 2 minutes into the thing, it was pulled down from one of the channels he was using. I think it was Discord. Even though they reacted pretty fast, I think 2 minutes is really quickly because you have to contact the administrator, flag it out, and they have to pull it down. By the time they pulled it down, there were 4,600 tweets in 48 hours. And 9 weeks later, Meta had to remove 1 million pieces of content. Okay, so this is the systems part. You can't control it in today's world of social media. And I think this is what's making it challenging. If you've got wrong news, uneducated populations who don't understand what's happening, I think this is important. I see a comment on jobs. I will come back to that. So I'd love to come back to that point again. Okay, this is another thing that I wanted to highlight. Look at where funding, for example, is happening on AI and where strategies are happening, right? So it gives you both funding and strategies. Are there any parts of the world where nothing's happening? And you'll find the continent of Africa, 54 countries, not much is happening, right? So this again, it becomes extremely interesting because the people creating the governance systems and the people creating the AI systems come from mostly more developed countries, right? And when we talk about bias, this is also very important. Are we making sure that we understand that? And I'll give you another example. I'm going to bring up the jobs one since that was a point over there. Yes, AI can replace jobs and it can replace routine jobs. So we were recently in Germany and we saw that, for example, Germany is a pioneer in the fourth industrial revolution. But Germany historically had a problem. They don't have many young people. So they had no choice if they wanted to continue their manufacturing output was to move to robotics. The same situation is there in Japan and in China and in most of the European countries. This is not the case in Africa or in Asia. So the point is really, and one of the universal human rights is the right to work. I really think we need to address that. It's not about replacing jobs. It's about quality of life, and what makes sense in one country may not make sense in another country. So I think countries need to kind of also understand why certain things are happening and also be very cognizant of what is required in their population. And MENA, as an example, has one of the youngest populations in the world, below the age of 15. You need jobs. 15-year-olds who become 21-year-olds with no jobs, that is a crisis waiting to happen. Also, there's a lot of research saying older people don't have enough savings for their pensions. So think of someone who's 40 or 45 who loses their job, cannot get retrained. Who's going to bear the cost of that? The state. So then you better have really strong pension funds and out of work funds for that. We spoke about hardware, right? So we also have to think of governance systems in terms of what is the infrastructure development. And I think this is really interesting because some countries have taken the effort to invest in very strong internet infrastructure. And you see as an example over here, but you do have a lot of countries with not much infrastructure that's there. And this, I think, is important also because this creates challenges. So I'll give you an example. I think when we talked about the speed of internet, this is a challenge in some places in India, for example, in rural areas, right? It could take as much as 275 milliseconds, but in really well-connected countries, it probably would be 90 milliseconds, right? Or 18 milliseconds, for example. So we're still not there in terms of speed. And remember, I had linked this to security. Now, there was a very interesting study done by our school on artificial intelligence impact in Dubai. And I thought this was also interesting because we see that many companies actually will have data privacy laws, so they will adopt data privacy laws, but they're not really sure on AI ethics guidelines. And this partially is because they outsource. So this is just not true only in Dubai. I think this is true across the world, where big companies will outsource to other companies and they never ask their suppliers what are their AI ethics guidelines, and they don't have ethics guidelines themselves to enforce. So we expect ethics guidelines to be the responsibility of the Googles and the Microsofts and the Metas and Twitter. But I think every company that uses AI should have AI ethics guidelines. So let's go back to what do I mean by governance? And if you look at the actual word, good governance is the ability to steer. So you steer towards a future that you want to create. So is this future sustainable? Is this future good for humanity? And when we say humanity, all humanity. And I think this is what we have to ask ourselves, right? What is the purpose of good governance? And it comes back to values. So I'll come back to this in the last section in terms of what values I mean. The point that is important is we don't have the luxury of time. If you just see how fast ChatGPT reached 1 million users, 5 days, right? The speed and the scale of adoption, and it's global, is getting so quick. Governments have no choice but to be agile, or companies too, right? So if you look at the average time for regulations and trade negotiations, this is 2 years, 1.5 years. So this is an example of GDPR. They proposed it in 2012, and it actually became legally binding in 2018, introduced in 2016. So you can see the time. We don't have that kind of time, not with things like this. So we really have to get into what I like this phrase, anticipatory governance. We need policymakers, and these policymakers are not just government, they're also private sector, who are thinking ahead of 5 years, 6 years of their products and asking, how can it be misused? What can go wrong? How can we ensure that we're using it for the right purpose? How do we put the safety guardrails to ensure it does the maximum good, right? And I think these are important ways of thinking. We don't have the excuse that we don't have information. There is plenty of information. I'm not saying go and put it up all online, but I'm saying you can search for it, and that way of thinking needs to change in maybe across the landscape. So what are some challenges? And I want to illustrate this with examples that I have. Right, Hamid says, yep, I agree with you, Hamid. This is important. There's a lot of things. Now, in the book, I think we have something like 12 decision scales. I want to highlight 2 of them. So the first one is human versus AI. One of my colleagues, who's my co-author, Dirk, does a lot of work in this area. And we talk about, how do machines take decisions and how do humans take decisions? Machines are fast, especially computers. They can do multiple computations per second, but they're narrow-minded. Human beings by default are not computers. I'm not going to be able to crunch numbers in 1 second. So you should stop comparing me to a machine. I'm slow, but the advantage I have is intuitive decision-making. I'm able to connect various pieces of information from my previous experiences, from what I've read, from what people have told me, and this informs my decision-making. I do a lot of work with, or I have a lot of friends who are investors. And I remember at one point I would ask them, on what basis do you choose which startup to go and invest? Because I was thinking, is there a formula? And most of them said on gut instinct. We talk to the founder, and if we feel, that person has that something special, it's on gut instinct. We know maybe everything won't work out, but that's the way they would describe it, right? It's not that they didn't do due diligence, but I wanted to highlight the importance of how human beings think and how machines think, and they're different. So we can't assume, and we should not force human beings to compete with machines in terms of rational thinking. I want to give you one example of a case. In 2010, the stock market dropped quite dramatically. It was in the sense it was 600 points for the S&P 500 in 4 minutes and 100 points for the Dow Jones in 10 minutes. Now, this was called the flash crash. was something extremely unusual. So they started investigating to find out what went wrong. Does anyone have an idea on this case? So after 5 years of digging, right, they found out there was a young man in London who did future-based trading, and he created a program from his parents' home that allowed him to go, yep, Mohammed, that allowed him to buy things and dump them in to drop the market and then go and pick it up at a lower price, okay? Now, it's interesting because when the market fell down, it signaled to others, and I'm sure others also had programs, that they needed to sell those shares. So basically it created like a contagion where everybody was now doing the same thing. And this ended up in this gigantic drop in market value. Now, has this ever happened again? Yep. Recently in 2022, right? But what's different between 2010 and 2022? Now, for example, they put in a cooling period. So if the market suddenly drops, the stock markets can close the market for 10 minutes just to give some time to figure out what's happening. And I think this is interesting. So we learned afterwards there, but again, somebody saw market prices dropping and people panicked and everyone went and did that. Your speed in which that time decision had to be made was in seconds, right? So the cooling period that they introduced currently right now is a good thing because human beings require time to think. And I think this is one great example that's them. I want to highlight that maybe that example, the trader was thinking only of himself. It wasn't maliciously to bring down a stock market. But today, for example, we have over 300,000 zero-day incidents. So this can be hacking incidents or bugs that are being done maliciously. So when you have an AI system, cybersecurity is an important part of that, and you need to really put money aside to maintain the system. And this means updating software, updating hardware regularly, both of them, which are critical, right? So I see a lot of companies that don't put money aside for these kind of things, and I think this becomes a big challenge. I would like to actually show you a live site, and maybe you can you see this? Can you see the map? If someone can just put in the chat. Yep, okay, great. So this is actually live cyber attacking hacks currently, as you can see it. And it says 140 million daily attacks on April 9th, okay, it was 80 million attacks, right? So this is fascinating. I mean, thank God there are people to go and take care of all of this. Speaking to a cybersecurity expert, so for example, in Estonia, most of the population have a strong understanding of coding and cybersecurity, so they use the population to manage that. On some cases, some people think open source coding is good because if you have a very let's say vested population that uses the open source coding, then they will make sure that they take care of it. But whichever way, I think it's complicated. And as we move to more and more AI systems, this problem will get more complicated. And as you can see, these attacks, this is live, by the way, yeah? They're coming from everywhere, right? So I think you cannot see can you not see the map? It's a live map. Can you see it now? Can you see the live map? Okay, great. Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the slide right now, but I thought this was fascinating and I did want to show it to you. So there's a lot of information out over there just to see. Okay, so going back to some of the stuff that we're doing, I want to show you another case. Has anyone heard of Stanislav Petrov? Now he's interesting because this gentleman was working in the USSR. This is during the Cold War. And in September, USSR had shot down a South Korean airline, which had killed 269 people, right? They had also just created a early warning nuclear system. The Cold War, there was a lot of nuclear arms pileup. And they had 40 satellites deployed across the world. It was supposed to be an early warning system. It was in response to what US was doing with their Star Wars system. And early in the morning on September 26th, now things were tense between the two countries because of whatever was happening. I think there were a lot of NATO military exercises near USSR border. On 26th, early in the morning, the satellite system sent a message saying there is one missile on its way to USSR. You're the general, I mean, you're the person responsible for this. The rules are very clearly, if anything is triggered, you need to inform your superiors, and most likely then they will decide retaliatory action. He decided to wait because it was one missile, and then 15 minutes later, 4 more were launched. And you know you have 20 minutes before it will reach USSR. What would you do? What would you do? Yes, you would inform your superiors. No, you would not inform your superiors. If you'd put it in the chat, or if you put a thumbs up, if you'll inform your superiors, that also helps me. Everybody's just going to wait for the missile to hit. Okay, so what did he do? He did nothing. He did not inform his superiors. And later on, when they asked him why he did not inform his superiors, his logic was this. US had 1,000 nuclear missiles, right? And they had even more nuclear warheads. Why would they only send 1 or 5? So this is a great example of intuitive thinking. And he was later on recognized for averting a nuclear war, which we know once we end up in a nuclear war, there are very few winners in this case, right? So we've got to acknowledge that human beings have something unique, intuitive thinking, right? And machines can't do this right now. So here is something that has been also used by RAND. RAND is a think tank that's in USA, and it actually talks about, you know, when should you use AI decision making? And it says when it's a chaotic, complex situation, AI should actually only be decision support. So the decision should be the human beings, or it should augment a human being. So it gives you additional data in which to take a decision. And only when it's simple and I would say things, in my opinion, things that do not involve a casualty to human beings, then you can automate the decision, right? So that becomes an interesting way to go and look at where should you use AI. And you find out this is not necessarily how AI is being used, but if you use that as a governance sort of roadmap on where AI should be used, it might help with creating better AI systems. So the other scale I want to bring in is AI accountability. Who should be accountable if something goes wrong? And I feel this is a great starting point, right? It's after an event happens, I love how we all point fingers at multiple players from companies in general. So companies are an entity by themselves, but, you know, we have to go beyond companies and ask, you know, who within? And I think that's a great way to start. Who in the senior management is responsible? So is it the board? Is it the president? Is it the division head, right? Who in that department uses the services, and who in the technical department? And if you are not building the systems yourself and you're outsourcing it, who in the purchasing department is responsible for that? Because sometimes purchasing departments, and there's been a lot of work on digitalization of governments, for example, don't understand AI systems, but will choose the cheaper order because it makes sense, but there may be a gap in due diligence. So accountability is a great way to start in building AI systems first. So I want to give you one example of a case, and I really like this one. So I've tried to make it as simple as possible, like a story. So the sequence is not in the sequence of events, but it's more to illustrate accountability. So I'm referring to the Boeing 737 MAX. It was developed in 2012 and manufactured in 2015. It got its final certification in 2017. Now, on launch, so it was flying, but it had two major accidents in 2018 and 2019, resulting in a casualty of 189 people and 157 people. So these were two different airlines, one in Asia and one in Africa, right? Now, initially, when the plane went down, and the first plane obviously was the Lion Air flight, there was no reason why the plane went down. So people said, well, it's pilot error. Definitely has to be pilot error. The system, the Airbus, I mean, the Boeing plane flies well. There's been no indication. The pilot didn't warn anybody that anything was wrong. So definitely it was a pilot error that went in. As they started investigating, you kind of find out that Boeing went and told its customers, we assure you your pilots don't need any training on this new airplane. And if they need training, we will give you a rebate of 1 million. So a lot of the companies that bought the plane did not necessarily train their pilots. So now who is responsible in this case? It's an AI system. By the way, today's commercial airlines are AI systems. They are highly complicated AI systems, right? So is this training error? So is it the HR department responsible over here, or the purchasing department that decided to do that? So questions on this. When they investigated further, they found out that normally there is a safety software in the plane, and it was a standard feature. It was made optional. So I guess if you wanted it, you paid extra. So now, is it the company's fault, the manufacturer who made it optional? Is it the regulators who let that become optional? Or is it the buyer's responsibility, who was so responsible, I mean, focusing on reducing price, that they did not opt for the safety feature? So that raises interesting questions on who's responsible. Now, when you dug a little bit more deeper, you found out actually it was a competition between Boeing and Airbus. In spring 2011, Boeing was going to lose a 10-year contract with American Airlines to Airbus, so they wanted to get this new aircraft out. They didn't want to spend the money on redesign because the complex process of getting a new model approved would be very complicated, so they were putting a heavier engine into the same body of a plane. And to compensate for that, they created this new system, AI system. The engineers were supposed to work at crazy speed. So in this case, do you think it was senior management that was responsible, because they're the ones that put the competitive pressure, and they decided that this needs to happen at all reasons? I'll leave that to you. And then finally, when you go and look at the chain of command, so remember, all these systems need to be approved, right? And actually the air industry has some of the highest safety standards in terms of the processes. But we find out over here, not only did the engineers, a lot of the work was outsourced because the engineers did not have the time, but we find out even for approvals, this was outsourced, right? For safety in that case. And we also see later on, I'm going to put this also over there, when the first airplane went down, it turned out the previous day, another airplane faced exactly the same issue, but somehow it wasn't communicated among all the other pilots, and one wonders whether there is a culture issue, you know, where enough information wasn't transferred. And I think this culture issue becomes even more interesting when you think of 51 regulators grounded the plane before the country that from where the plane was in decided to ground that particular plane. So AI systems are complicated. And when you look at governance, the space is even more complicated. So if you start with who is accountable when something goes wrong, I feel then it becomes a lot more easier to be responsible for the system you develop. But when you don't have accountability and it's like, it's FAA's responsibility, it's the customer's responsibility, it's the engineer's responsibility, then it becomes really, really complicated. I've worked with a lot of engineers and spoken to them, and they all say the same thing. We sometimes don't know what the code we're developing is for. We're just told to develop something, and it's a tiny little bit. Maybe they're doing an API as an example, but they don't know what it's exactly for. So it becomes very hard for them to see the big picture, right? And again, there's this interesting question of responsibility and ownership, right? Lion Group is private. Boeing has institutional investors, but is private. Ethiopian Airlines is government, right? Which one would you hold more accountable to in terms of standards? Does it make a difference or does it not make a difference? I mean, this is just some things for you to think about. So I want to highlight once again, AI systems are complicated, and we need to stop referring or using the term AI as a default explanation for everything. When we say AI, most people think, oh, it's an app. Well, you know, the app uses data and then it's meant for a particular hardware. That's why you're doing Android or you're doing iOS. And then how many APIs are there? And what's your security thing? And right now, my worry on data is if you go to the App Store, there are a lot of apps that don't work. And I really wonder who has data, you know, have all the links that I've put there on this dead app, who can access them. So we as those responsible for good governance must look at them as AI systems. And this is some work that IEEE is doing quite well at. So I come to the fourth section, which is about opportunities and trade-offs, right? AI is a tremendous opportunity in terms of contribution to the economy. So we think at some points 2 trillion to 15 trillion, the numbers actually differ, but you also can look at this and you see which countries are more poised to make money on AI as opposed to other countries, right? So we talked about fairness. So this is also very interesting in terms of fairness, right? Also, there was a recent survey, and most companies feel, especially after the pandemic, that they may adopt some type of AI. And they say AI, but I would like to say AI systems. So what we need to understand is the trade-offs, right? And when I say trade-offs, you can use any one of these synonyms. It could be a compromise. So you're agreeing that, yes, maybe it increases money for the company, but it will mean that I decrease employment. I will not hire that much more people. So my contribution, and most companies do ESG, right? And SDGs, we talk about work again. So that means I'm going to reduce that. So it's a trade-off. I prefer that word when we look at governance, right? So I'm going to give you the example of autonomous vehicles, right? And on one hand, I saw this very interesting report that says, well, autonomous vehicles will save all these people's lives because there'll be less traffic accidents. And I thought, this is interesting. They've only looked at how many people they've died. Do they have data on how many people have survived because a human being was able to ensure that they did not hit somebody? And I don't think they have that data. So already you see that decision making is based on the worst case situation and not on actually data that is actually there. But anyway, if we see the progression of autonomous cars, we see this number is going to increase quite dramatically by 2030, right? So they're predicting a quite large market size. And what's interesting in autonomous cars, and we talked about AI being narrow, that it can only do a couple of things, is that there is more than 200 onboard sensors. So they're all measuring different things. Engine heat, one is looking at maybe the road, one is different things. And they constantly upload data, right? And if we think of how long, you would drive a car in a day or in a year, we're thinking of how much of carbon footprint is required in terms of data transmission, data storage, and this becomes interesting, right? This data or the emissions is quite high. They think it would be a significant source of carbon emissions, right? 0.3% of total global emissions, equivalent to the footprint of Argentina, one country. So when we're looking at systems, we're connecting all the dots, right? Sustainability, human beings, we're looking at the data, hardware, software. And what's also interesting for me is if we need to ensure that it's not just about software and algorithms and apps, we need to make sure hardware efficiency will have to double faster every 1.1 years if we need to keep the emissions low. Already we know the world is heating quite significantly, and this raises a lot of questions. Autonomous cars also have lithium battery cells, and we also know when lithium touches water, what happens in those cases. So if the water levels rise, I think this is also a problem that we need to consider by 2050. The other thing we talk about is skill obsolescence, right? So on one hand, I read a report that AI will create something like 55 million jobs. On another hand, it said it will lose 12 million jobs or even maybe even more. But the interesting thing is I saw a study coming out of UK, and it said that the new jobs AI creates will actually be in lower paying jobs. So this becomes interesting. You take away a job from somebody and you use their data, right? So you're looking at how somebody, let's say, for example, does computing in accounting. Then you create a program that actually makes their job redundant, so they don't have now a skill. And then you say, well, now you have to learn something. And they took, what, 16 years to become an accountant? Let's say even they did their final degree, 3 years to become an accountant. Who's going to pay for the 3 years of reskilling? So what is the strategy countries have in place, or even companies that make jobs obsolete? I think this becomes interesting, right? So this is a McKinsey report that says something very similar. So what is difference this time around? So in the Industrial Revolution, there was a term, I think they called them Luddites. These were people who are anti-machinery, right? So are we, those of us who were once concerned about AI or talking about AI governance, are we doing the same thing? And I think no. The difference this time is the scale and the speed, right? We just saw how quickly these changes happen. You can't go back and fix the error. So I think it's important to realize this is not the 1800s when things took a lot more time. This is the year 2023 when things are fantastically fast. And I like this. It says, jobs that robots can replace are not good jobs in the first place. It says, as humans, we climb up the rungs of drudgery, physically tasking or mind-numbing jobs, to jobs that use what got us to the top of the food chains, our brains. And my point is, this is not true. We know that some people are kinesthetic. They like movement. They become dancers. Maybe in some cases, they like working with their hands, right? Some people like working with their brains and sitting on a chair the whole day. I think that's the beauty of human beings, is we have different skill sets. And when we read stuff like this, we start believing it, and that is very dangerous. I think it's important to acknowledge human beings have different skills, and for us to understand if there's a place for them over there. So how do we future-proof AI? And I know we have very little time. Is the thing is, we can future-proof AI systems simply by acknowledging what is the future we want for us humans. So if we put humans first, that's a good part to start. So I'd start by defining values. The first thing you want to do is define your values, and you want to be human-centric, right? So humans first. The second thing is realize humans need to live in an environment, so then be planet-centric, right? And this is important because we know AI, for example, hardware, if it's not recycled properly, is toxic for the environment. Even the way you make an AI chip is extremely toxic. So we know there is a sustainability issue for hardware. We've talked about the sustainability issue for software and data. So even more, this is important that we are planet-centric. We need to understand about the human in the loop. So we said decision making. So what is the purpose of the AI system? Is it to benefit the human, or is it to make money, or what do we want? And I just want to show you what I mean with this. In some cases, we're using AI to make money, and that's fine. Acknowledge it transparently. In some cases, AI is the end result, and we're using the human being and money for the end result. And I'll give you an example. If at the end of the day, you're using a system like ChatGPT, which used humans to train the data and is using material humans, right, for the machine, then humans are part of the supply chain, right? So then there's an obligation on how you treat the humans in the supply chain. In some cases, this is a tool to help the human being. And I like this model, but an even better model, I think, is where you have the human and you're looking at the planet, right? And this, for me, is the best possible way of using AI in an ideal situation, right? The second thing is you need to be agile. There's no shortcuts on this. No matter what we predict in terms of what could go wrong, something will go wrong, right? And there are all these examples. Somebody in Samsung put up some source code on ChatGPT, and now it's public, so they have a problem over there. Recently, the FFA had an issue where they had to ground a couple of flights, and then UK had a big scandal with an old software, accounting software that they were using in the post office, right? And they found out much later it was tallying up the things wrong. So these are things you can go and look at. But more and more we realize the only way you can solve this is quickly acknowledging you have a problem and then putting teams together to solve it. There's just think of the time frame of the example I gave you with the Buffalo shooting. So how would I create a governance framework? The first one, accountability. I would start with accountability, and I would do this at an individual level and across the supply chain. So ask the question, who is accountable first? Then the second thing I would do is then talk about how transparent you want to be. And of course, I understand in some cases, some sectors are sensitive sectors. So you cannot be fully transparent about what's happening, but you should have internally an acknowledgement of why you're not transparent and where you will be transparent. I think this is not left to default or accident. It is actually a deliberately thought strategy. Talk about your responsibility and your security, because we found out that that's very critical, security. Talk about intent. What is the purpose of you doing this? And again, I would look at intent in two ways, human-centric and in terms of planet, right? So I think that becomes good. Talk about human in the loop. So where is the human in the decision-making? Is the AI system to augment or replace? And the worry right now with AI systems is more and more we're replacing a lot of things we used to take decisions on by default. So I know, for example, I've driven on the road, the GPS will say go left. I see lots of cars on the left, and I'm in my head, I'm saying, oh, it looks like a traffic jam, and I still go left. And I'm thinking afterwards, why did I do that? I should have gone right. But we default, it didn't ask me, it just said go left. And then I got lazy and I allowed it to take a decision for me. So human in the loop is important. Data management. One is the choice. Do I have a choice to say, no, I don't want to give my data? And the second one is, how do we manage it? And this is also an education issue. I think that needs to be put over there, very critical. Algorithm governance. We know that a lot of information, and I have lots of in the book that I've put together with my co-authors, we have a lot of examples of bias that have come out because of algorithms. And in some cases, it started with intent, right? Not necessarily to do harm, but accidentally became like that. And the last one is software, hardware, system robustness. So we really need to do all of these things. The starting frame is accountability, in my opinion. So with that, thank you so much for joining. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat box. I think at this point, you can open up your mics. Can we open up the mics? And I'm happy to take questions. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take. Yes, sure. Go ahead, Saud. Can you open up your mic? I'm trying to see. I think I've unmuted. So if you have a question, you can go ahead and ask.
Hi, Meladina. This is
Hi,
Amal.
Hi, Amal.
Hi, thank you for the great session. Just a comment, I think what you have stated about the way that human is located in this chain is the most important, whether the human is used in the supply chain or basically, or the human gets the last benefit or the results. I think that for me clarified, more, give it a more clearer perspective. So thank you very much for that.
You're most welcome, Mama. I mean, you're free to send me questions if you want. I think my email, you can just find it. Do you think artificial intelligence will succeed? Sorry, the things are going so quickly that I think so, Saud, yes, I think AI can be used in any sector. That's the beauty of AI systems, right? But so one of the things we're struggling with and some of the work that I'm working on is how will I represent culture in the metaverse? And with everyone being an avatar, I don't want culture to be, what clothes an avatar wears or the accent in which they speak or things like that, or heritage. So that becomes challenging. Whereas if it's about, sorry, go ahead. So I think it's really how we can go and look at some of those things. Hi, Nadine. I think we can all listen to you. Is there any other question?
Excuse me, Doctor.
Yes, hi, Amal.
Firstly, I would like to thank you for this interesting session today.
Sure.
It was very useful. Doctor, I want to ask you about the point of trade-off between, for example, if we have a sector that have a significant contribution on the GDP, but this sector is causing a carbon emissions, and the frame of the labor force in this sector is low to medium skilled labor force. And even though the technology that they are using in this sector is classified as low to medium technology. As a government, if I want to maximize the production of this sector and raise the contribution of it on the GDP so that I can achieve the strategic goals of the UAE in the next 10 years, there is a trade-off in this.
Yes.
About how I'm gonna to deal with this. Of course, a lot of labor force are gonna to lose their jobs, Doctor, because they are low to medium skilled labor force. what I'm gonna to do as a government, I'm gonna, for example, to attract AI companies or try to make some PPP with some global companies to deal this for me and control this, for example, in the UAE, so that I can improve the production of the factories that I have in the UAE. But as I told you, Doctor, on the other hand, I'm gonna to let a lot of labor force to lose their jobs. I read on one article about England experience on this. How do they deal with this? They say that it takes from British people 10 years to enter the market again.
Yes,
After they lose their jobs because of AI.
this
So
is true.
if I'm going to make a policy to enhance the production of this sector, for example, to reduce carbon emissions, make a competitive products in the market, and make also a competing products in the global markets, how I'm going to deal with this?
So first of all, I think congratulations, you thought of all of that, right? Very often people aren't thinking of trade-offs. I love that you've thought of that so that's great, because now you're trying to figure out how can I help people to reskill them. So one is reskilling, right? They're going to lose their jobs. So Germany actually does this in the car industry. They use a lot of automation. They figure out really ahead of the time how many people are going to lose their job. And then they have a 5-year transition plan, because it's not overnight that you will automate, right? Lose their jobs, they work with them on reskilling and then try and see if they can find jobs within the company in another role, or if they have to go out, at least they are going out with new set of skills. So that becomes a HR training thing. On the other hand, I love the fact that you also spoke about carbon emissions, which means that you're aware, you'll always look for new technologies to reduce the carbon emissions, right? I don't like the word offsetting. I've written a whole blog on that on my LinkedIn profile because I worry about that. But I think this becomes an interesting thing that you're thinking of that. So happy to talk to you more separately on that, but you're on the right path. You have acknowledged the trade-offs, which is fantastic. So congratulations on that. And the very fact that you're looking at that tells me you will make the right decisions. Half the time people aren't aware of the trade-offs, and that's the worry. So well done, Amal.
Thank you, Doctor. If you don't mind, later on, inshallah, we will have a Zoom meeting, Doctor.
Sure, absolutely like that. So there's another session coming on 13th. It's Dr. Khalid, and he's actually talking about employability and AI. So I think maybe that will also be interesting for you all. And maybe even for you, Amal. This is on 13th April in the morning at 10:30 a.m. in the morning. Okay, so I think if there's no other questions, I'm quite happy to.
Good evening, Doctor.
Yes, hi.
Can I ask about one question you posed
Sure.
earlier about if the AI, in terms of regulation, how can we regulate applying the AI, into sectors and government and everything before regulation, or we have to regulate first before applying the AI completely?
I love that question. I think we have to train startup founders, the general public, people in universities who are coming out, even young children on AI, what goes well and what doesn't go well and what should be good governance, right? So if we train them very well, then maybe the role of the government can reduce. You assist in that training. In some cases, we talk about digital skills, but I'll just give you an example. I was in a couple of councils on the metaverse, and I was surprised to see young children, 5, 6, I don't know, on things like TikTok or even on augmented virtual reality things. These are not meant for young children. So is it the parents' responsibility? Is it the siblings' responsibility? Whose responsibility is it? Right?
Yeah,
So there's
this is
gap
confusing.
here on education. Things like VR headsets are not designed for kids. They probably will have health issues. So we have not maybe explained all of that. Young children are on TikTok and these, then they start working on likes, right? We saw some of the challenges of this in Facebook, for example. Too many kids at a young age think that their friends are on Facebook and they only need likes, and that's not very healthy for their growth and development. So I think this is important. When I was in Estonia, and Estonia is known for adopting AI pretty strongly, I asked somebody who was a senior advisor for AI in the government, how do you manage? And he said, every weekend we switch off our mobiles and we get off technology. We go into the forest, we go into the bogs, and we know that there's a whole other life besides AI, and this is just a tool. So I think that's something we also need to do. And I was someone who grew into it. I'm always on my computer, almost all waking hours. I wish I had trained my children to spend some time away from such things. I didn't do that, but now I think this is important we train.
Thank you, Doctor. But as a conclusion, can I conclude that AI, we can use it as a tool, not as a power, like apply it as a power, like extra power to strengthen the sector or the companies or similar things? Because the regulation that we are waiting for, is it a ready-made regulation, or we have to create, or governments has to create, new regulations to apply the AI completely?
I think there will be lots of regulations, and they will have to keep updating it as we learn more things. Like the example of ChatGPT, and it was chatbots were considered low risk AI systems in the EU thing. Now with ChatGPT, it's considered high risk, right? Yes. So regulations will constantly have to be updated, but I do think it is the company's responsibility also. So historically, we have said only it's the tech company's responsibility. I now believe every company that adopts AI also has the responsibility, because by default, you're pushing it out to your customers or to your users, right? Or to your suppliers who may not have a choice. So then you need to do the due diligence, and you need to be having the high level of governance systems. Why are you doing that? And I think that's important.
Yeah, and the power to control it.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You're most welcome. Ishak, please go ahead.
What would be the privacy rights of the citizens in this AI era?
Oh, that's an interesting question. When I ask a lot of experts, that notion of privacy becomes redundant, really, right? So it's a question of trust. Whom do you trust the most to give your data to? So do you trust private sector? Do you trust the app? And I think those are things we need to ask questions. So where can some of the regulations come in, and where are some of the regulations coming in, is to make it very clear what you're giving up. So when I say, okay, so for example, I download X app and it says, I want access to your photographs, to your contact list. What does that mean? I don't know today what that means. I've asked a lot of people, does that mean they can download my entire contact list and all my pictures? Or does that mean they only get access to the contact that I give them access to, or the photograph? I suspect they have access to everything, right? And that's the worry. So tomorrow, if ChatGPT automatically gets embedded in Microsoft Bing, for example, does that mean everything that you write, they have? Because the Samsung case shows when they put it on ChatGPT, then the code was available for public. So these are sticky questions, and I don't have answers for that. but it's very difficult to do because the moment you have APIs connecting you with multiple software systems, the data moves. And as an example, there was a study done on virtual reality headsets, and I was shocked on this. Data gets leaked from the hardware for the gyroscope, which allows you to look at, I think, movement and positioning. And I didn't think hardware would actually need data, but apparently there was a point of data leakage. Abdullah, go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor, for your presentations. I think since in IT industry, we have a lot of governance framework that's available already. I think it would be a good idea if you want to think about AI governance is to develop those frameworks to suit the principles of AIs that is being used currently, and expand the accountability and the privacy and those governance principles that can be always expanded and developed. Privacy, as the previous questions, the person who asked the questions, yes, there are privacy laws in like GDPR in Europe. I think in Saudi Arabia, they are starting with the privacy law, as well as in UAE as well. I think we are developing this. So it's not something that we have to start from scratch. I think from my point of view, we can develop the existing framework to suit the AI environment. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of work done. I absolutely agree with you. A lot of regulations, like you saw, there were 800 policies, right, on AI, for example. So there's a lot of that there. The difficulty historically has been, how do you translate it to apply it? You know, so there's a legal part of it on translation, and then there's another part on customer awareness, and is it easy for them to understand what does it mean? So I think that's where the work needs to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. We need to build the ecosystems that's make the implementation is much easier. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I think if there's no more questions, then I'm going to stop. But I really appreciate everyone coming here. And please feel free to reach out anytime you want on my email. I'll just put it in the chat box. The fact that you're all here, we all want the same thing, which is we want to build a happy, safer, healthier, planet positive Earth. So thank you so much and have a very good night. Abdullah, please go ahead if you're still got your hand up.
No, thank you very much. I have already
Okay.
lowered it down. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. My email, I'm putting it again. Oh. Sorry, putting it again. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye and good night. I'm going to just close this now.